Hi everyone, welcome to today's Brown Bag. We have Rahul coming here and talking to us about how to freelance with your web dev skills. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to him and he's going to get started.
Cool. Hi, can you all hear me all right? Cool. So I'm really excited today to talk to you guys about the basics of freelancing. As Bree said, my name is Rahul Desai. I am a member of the Full Stack Web 14 cohort. And while I know that doesn't seem like a ton of web dev experience, I actually knew how to build static websites before I came to Lambda. So about 4 years back, I was doing that as a side hustle. So I can give more background about my career and where I've been, but I don't think that's super necessary for today's content. Just going through this presentation, my main goal for today is to teach you all the basics of end-to-end freelancing, meaning how to go from finding a lead to sell to actually building a product and shipping it for your client. My secondary goal is hopefully to present what I aim to have the prettiest brown bag slides ever, but you guys can let me know about that. And with that in mind, let's get going. I'm actually also going to go on video mute just so that my internet doesn't cut out in the middle. So just this, for 5 minutes, let's talk about what today is going to be about and what it's not about, because setting expectations is a good skill. And just like I'm going to set your guys' expectations, you should be setting your clients' expectations in the future. So first off, what is success, right? Everybody has a different definition of what success is, but for the purposes of this presentation and for starting off as a freelancer, supporting yourself in school, not earning a full-time income is what we're going to call success. Why is that? It's because I personally don't have experience working as a full-time freelancer. I did it as a side gig, so I'm not comfortable commenting on what it takes to do this full-time. But secondarily, at scale, if you're doing this for a true living, it becomes a lot more about client services and selling and not so much about coding. And seeing as that we're all in a programming school currently, I think we all want to focus more on the coding. So success ultimately is about making the amount of money you need to support your current lifestyle as a Lambda student. So today, ultimately, is going to be about two main things. One is priming ourselves for further learning. This is a quick start guide. It's about getting started and orienting ourselves in the world of freelancing and potentially dispelling some confusion you might have. Secondarily, it's about creating a process. Just like Lambda has created a process for us to learn, this brown bag is about creating a process around working. And ultimately, having that process means that we'll have discipline and efficiency, which over time leads to better results as a freelancer. What it's not about, on the flip side, is teaching you everything you'll need to know. Freelancing is a vast topic, and I can't be comprehensive in the time we have together today. We won't cover things like tax law, accounting, in-depth legal. We'll touch on it, but it's not going to be everything you need to know. So you're going to have to go research on your own, just like you do with classwork. And again, it's not going to be how to freelance as a living. It's income while studying, as I mentioned. And finally, what I didn't say here is that this is not based on data. It's purely my lived experience. So if something strikes you as wrong or not right for your circumstances, feel free to take it with a grain of salt and work on it how you need to. So ultimately, today is a balance of breadth and speed. We're going to learn a little about a lot. So jumping into the actual meat of our discussion, freelancing success effectively means you're building a business of one employee, and that's you. That means you have to do everything from sales, marketing, legal, finance, design, and build. And on top of all of that, you need great client service. It sounds like a lot, but ultimately, you're going to be able to tackle it. And so to speak to sales and marketing specifically, in big businesses, these are massive departments that are separate and have their own teams and functions and sub-roles. But for you as a freelancer, they can't be, because you have to do everything. So to make it easier, again, you need a defined, repeatable process. And so I present to you what I call the freelance funnel. In traditional sales and marketing, there are funnels as well. And I've sort of simplified and distilled them down into one funnel that will work for freelancing. This is a framework. Just like in programming, we have frameworks to make things easier. There are business frameworks that help simplify how you think about problems. And so the freelance funnel helps give us a process and a framework to think about how to get going with sales and marketing. And ultimately, there are going to be 5 steps. And this is an oversimplification, and we'll go through each of these in turn. So the first is know who you want to sell to, who you want to serve, who your right client is, and finding them. The next thing is getting them interested in you, right? You know who you want to work with. Why should they work with you? 3 is showing them that you're capable of doing what you say, and also giving them a vision of what their future with a website could look like. 4 is aligning with them on mutually agreeable terms through negotiation. And 5 is actually closing the deal, selling, and getting to work and starting to make some money. So the first point is, how do you generate leads? Finding potential leads is called prospecting. And this is going to be super important, because if you don't have any prospects, you'll never have any customers. So the first thing to do as you're prospecting is to develop a big yet manageable lead list. You want to get a lot of leads, because some people won't be interested in you for reasons you can't control. Maybe they've had a bad quarter and they don't have cash on hand to pay you. Or maybe they're getting enough customers in their mind that they don't need a website. Ultimately, it's about the needs of their business, and it's not a reflection of you or your skills. And we all know that leads will drop out of the funnel. That's why it's a funnel and not a slide. But if you were to take away one thing from this presentation when it comes to leads, it's just one statistic that I want you to know, which is that 50 to 66% of all small businesses in the US don't have a website at all. And of the 6 million businesses in the country, 98% of them are considered small businesses. So it's a vast market. And I guarantee there's at least one of these businesses in your town or city that could use your help. Ultimately, what I want you to gather here is that the world truly does need people like us with these skills. And so for you, your starting criteria should be finding these small local businesses that need your help. And you can be checking which of them lack sites or have bad or outdated ones. Other criteria could be things you care about. I like the business. I shop there. It's an industry I'm interested in, or they support causes that I care about, etc. Just make sure to only use 2 or 3 key decision criteria. Otherwise, you'll artificially limit your lead list. And you don't want to do that. You want more leads, because you know some of them will drop out. And then the best way to just get started is ask friends and family. Do they need help, or do they know somebody who needs help? That's what I did, and it worked out pretty spectacularly. And then jumping into the next step in our funnel, which is about generating interest. Ultimately, this is going to be about marketing. Traditionally, marketing comes before leads in a larger business. But because you don't have a marketing budget, you can't just blast out ads into the ether and hope they'll work. Your goal ultimately is to get the folks on your lead list interested. It's very targeted marketing for you. And so there's 2 goals here. One is to get their interest, and the other is to show why you're right for the job. The first way to do this is outbound marketing, which is advertising. Big businesses would rely on things like Facebook ads and billboards, but that's not going to be right for you. Instead, you want to have flyers and brochures, things that you can leave around your town or city and that explain the benefits of having a website and why working with you would be beneficial for the target client. Next is inbound marketing, i.e. when people are interested and they want to learn more about you. So maybe your brochure will link to your portfolio or your GitHub. This is a way to show your work, your expertise, and it's a way that you can explain the design and technical choices you've made. Finally, there's word of mouth. Based on doing great work, you can ask for intros to other people. So if you do a great job and you like your client and they like you, you can say, hey, do you know anybody else who would benefit from my work? If so, and they decide to work with me, I'll give you $50 off and I'll give them $50 off, just as a referral discount. It's a hypothetical. It could be more or less than that, depending on the size of the contract. But that's marketing. Then the next piece in our sales and marketing funnel is getting engagement. So this is where you're actually approaching the client in a concerted way. And in this phase, first impressions are everything. I used to dress up and wear a button-down and jeans and often a blazer. Generally, we know that a lot of people in tech don't dress up a bunch, but when you're dealing with these non-technical decision makers who don't know the ins and outs of the tech industry, it does help sometimes to dress the part of a traditional business person. Ultimately, I hate to admit it, but first impressions can kill a sale before you even get off the ground. So it's just something little, like being confident and dressing the part will help you up front. The next thing when you go to engage is find the decision maker. Normally, this is the business owner, and you want them because they can put up the money to pay you. whereas someone like a sales rep or a manager might not have that capacity. And when you're going to the owner, you might want to go to them physically, because it's much harder to turn someone away when they're physically at your door versus calling or emailing, where they can just hang up or not respond. You don't want to be rude, though, when you're going about this approach. You want to explain how you found them and your personal connection. For example, if my uncle introduced me to a client or said, hey, this business might need you, that's a good way to start your approach. Or alternatively, I come to your store once a week and buy something here. I'd love to help you guys out with your website. It's just these little things that help you build a relationship with your target client. Then you want to tell them how a website can help them. You might say something like, oh, Facebook use is declining in the wake of all their scandals. It's maybe not the best place for you to have your online identity anymore. Or something like, you have less control over a Google Maps profile or a Yelp profile. Maybe a website is the best way for you to have granular control over that digital identity. So these are things you can say to just get people interested and come around to the perspective of why having a website is valuable. Then you want to start handling objections. If they say, oh, I don't have a ton of money, well, you can say, because I'm a freelancer, I won't charge you nearly as much as an agency. It'll be probably something quite cheap relative to those prices, and you might even be able to write it off on your taxes. And these are the things that business owners value, right? Because most of them want to defer their taxes or have write-offs. And ultimately, it's about occupying the same mind space as that business owner. Right? They want to know what this can do for their business. They don't really necessarily care about the technical details and the implementation like we do. So the nice thing here, the best thing you can do really, is to be empathetic to the business owner. Say, if this was my business, what would I want to hear from someone who's trying to help me? If the client is intractable, if you clearly sense they don't want to work with you for whatever reason, you can't convince them, it's wise to get to know quickly. And a lot of people who start out selling, they say, well, no, don't I want to push for a yes all the time? Unfortunately, the more time you sink into getting a yes from someone who doesn't want to work with you, that's all time you could have been spending on developing other leads, getting other people to say yes, if that one person had just said no quickly so you could move on. So ultimately, you should know when to cut your losses, and a client might not be right for you. A big winner for me has been inspiring clients to say, here's what your website could look like. Things like video backgrounds, 3D animations, restaurant menus that are displayed on the site, even high-def pictures. These are just ways that your client can see, oh, my brand, my business can live on the internet. For example, I worked with a doctor's office once upon a time, and they complained about how inefficient everything was at their office. Every time a patient came to visit, they would have to refill the same forms. I'm sure all of us know this. You go to the doctor's office, you fill out that paperwork, you state all your medical history, and it's just the same thing every single time. So this doctor's office said, can you help us find a way to make this easier? And I said, why don't you just put the form on your website so they can download it, print it, and fill it out and bring it to the office? And this doctor's office said, okay, we'll try it. And they did it. And ultimately, it resulted in much greater efficiency for each of their patient visits. And so it's even little things like that that don't seem very technical or interesting to us that end up having a massive impact for various businesses. And ultimately, you got to realize that these people are non-technical. Otherwise, they'd have a great website already. And so it's part of this is just bringing them along on the journey, crafting an engaging story about why introducing technology into their business is something valuable. So then moving on to contracting, we're going to talk a little bit about the legal side because it's important to know about. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as gospel. So first off, negotiations. In movies and TV entertainment more broadly, negotiations are portrayed as these very hostile interactions. But if you're making an enemy and not an ally out of the person on the other side of the table, you've pretty much killed your sale before you start. Ultimately, these negotiations are built, they're meant to build mutually beneficial relationships, just like a friendship or meeting a new acquaintance or networking. It's all about being aligned to the other side and having empathy for them. And so ultimately, when you're negotiating, what you want to do is talk things out and get in their head and understand where they're coming from. Ultimately, again, it's about their vision for their business, and you're trying to help them accomplish that. But you got to look after your own needs as well in a negotiation. It's not just one side. It's not rolling over and saying, oh, client, I'll do whatever you like. Because you need to know what's right for you as well. Again, this is a business, and you're in it to make money for yourself and provide for yourself and learn things. And so you got to know, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that if the client doesn't agree, you'll walk away from the deal? Often these things are what's the lowest rate you're willing to take per hour of your time or per page of a website or whatever you want to call it. The size of the site. For example, maybe you won't build a site smaller than 2 pages, but you won't build a site bigger than 5 pages. Maybe you won't work more than 40 hours on a project or 3 weeks or what have you. Right? These are all factors, and you know your own life. And so therefore, you're the best person to say, hey, I actually can dictate my own terms, and this is what I need for this freelancing stuff to work out for me. For example, and this is actually where I find people don't have confidence, despite having tons of talent, tons of confidence, all these great skills. So one anecdote, I was in college and a professor was an expert witness in a lawsuit, in an intellectual property lawsuit. And I had done some research on private company valuations, like startup valuations, and his expertise was in public companies. This particular lawsuit involved private companies, and he didn't know where to get started. And so he ended up talking to my faculty advisor for some reason, and she said, oh, talk to Rahul. He knows about this stuff. Mind you, I knew very little, but apparently enough to get involved with this guy. And he calls me into his office and says, hey, I'm working on this lawsuit. Here's the details. People say you have the skills I need. Name your rate. And no one had ever said that to me before. I was flabbergasted because I had only ever really made minimum wage prior to that moment in time. And so my mind was biased and anchored towards what I could make because I'd been making minimum wage. And I said, oh, $10 an hour. And he just gives me this funny look. And then he bursts out laughing. And I'm like super embarrassed. I don't know what's going on. And once his fit of laughing subsides, he's like, you shouldn't leave money on the table like that. You have a valuable skill. If I'm coming to you and not to another professor, not to a professional, that means I couldn't find this skill that I'm looking for somewhere else. Meaning that you could have charged me a lot more. I was willing to give you $50 an hour. And I'm like, wow, I don't even understand. Like, I'm nobody. I'm a 19-year-old kid. I don't know what I'm talking about. And you're willing to give me $50 an hour? And he's like, well, yeah, now because you lowballed and you didn't have confidence in yourself, I'm going to give you 15 so you learn a lesson. And I've never forgotten that anecdote. Because you got to be confident in your own skills, right? If people want to work with you, that means you have value. Your skills have value. You should be charging for them. And so when you're negotiating, you should keep that in mind, top of mind. Just be confident in your skills. They are worth something, I promise you. And so now you're at the close, right? You've negotiated, you're on the same page, you're ready to close the deal with the client. Right here, I got to provide the obligatory disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. Nothing here should be construed as legal advice or attorney-client relationship. You agree not to hold me liable for any consequences arising for your use of the contracts that I've linked on this slide. Yeah, but with that out of the way, contracting is really, really important because this is where you put into writing the things you've agreed upon in your negotiation. My view is that just like code, you should have boilerplate contracts. This makes life a lot easier when you're trying to do deals with 5 or 10 clients at a time. I tend to use boilerplates like the ones I've linked. The first of the links is a very comprehensive contract that has tons of different provisions. In fact, it wants you to choose between some of them because some of them contradict each other. The second one is in human language. So if you want to read that, it'll help you understand the legalese a little bit better. But for you, ultimately, when you're looking at a contract, what it's going to be about is the schedule and the fees, i.e. what work are you doing? When are you doing it? How much is it costing the client? And then the flip side is what do you expect the client to do as part of the contract? It's not just a one-sided affair. You can request that the client does things for you to make the process easier. This might be providing images, providing the logo, providing the text for the site, setting up weekly meetings or calls, things that they need to do in order to get the work done. Because ultimately, your client can be a bottleneck if you're not telling them, hey, I need you to be involved here, here, and here. And so for you and your client, you should, inside of this contract, you should be including a rate card. And a rate card tells you, okay, here are my fees, here are the milestones in this agreement. And that might be, I'm going to charge you $250 to start this contract, and then $50 an hour for all the hours that I work. And that's a reasonable rate, actually, $50 an hour. That's what I was charging when I freelanced, and nobody batted an eye. I'm sure I could have charged actually like 100 or more, and people wouldn't have minded. Because ultimately, for these businesses, they can write it off. It's not actually money coming out of their pocket. It's just less they pay in taxes. And so really, you can charge for any number of services you want to offer. You can say, if you want me to write copy, I can write copy for you for your site for $20 a paragraph. If you want me to source images for you, I can do that for like $10, $20 an image. If you want me to do SEO, I can do that for $100 per page. Stuff like that, right? These skills aren't easy to come by, right? You're going through school. You're doing the equivalent of a computer science degree in 6 months, which is pretty intense. Your skills are not easy to come by. And so therefore, you really should be charging for them. And each of these things, if you explain why the skill is valued as such, most clients will say, okay, hey, I'm willing to pay because I couldn't find this skill elsewhere. And then the other thing you should be including in your contract is how many revisions of the site are you willing to do? So what we're going to talk about next is the design and build phase. And you might say, okay, I'll give you 2 rounds of design. And if you want to give me more feedback after that and expect a full design revision, I'll charge you $50 per revision. And then if you get to the actual coded up site, you might say, I'll give you 1 revision free. And then the next one might be $100 and so on and so forth. But ultimately, you should know what your rates are. And all of this should be informing your negotiation when you go about it, because the contract is pretty much going to stay the same. Some of the rates might change, some of the dates and details might change, but ultimately the gist of it is going to be pretty much the same, because it'll be based on what you know you need in your life to make this worthwhile. Then moving on, this is the fun stuff, right? This is why we all came to Lambda School, to learn computer science, to build websites. It's about designing and build. And these are actually 2 separate phases, because you shouldn't just jump into building a website. It's much, much more costly to revise code than it is to revise something on a pen and paper. So first off, how do you design a client site? You've got basically 3 main tools in your toolkit. The first is actually utilizing your client, right? They have a brand. As part of that brand, I'm sure they have marketing, they have copy, they have images, they have things that they can give you to put in the website. And furthermore, they have a vision. Talking to them up front and trying to understand what they want is the best way to prevent surprises and disappointment down the line. And ultimately, you're helping them execute what they want. And so talking to them up front is the best thing you can do. And ultimately, this is the way in which you get those initial assets from them. And if they don't have much in the way of assets, you can look at whatever they do have and then extrapolate from there. So their logo might have a purple color. You can sample that purple and use it throughout the site. Maybe it has a green. I'm clearly talking about the Olive Garden logo right now. But based on that, that's how you get started, right? It's the seeds for the ideas you're going to come up with throughout the freelancing process. Next up is mood boarding, right? Mood boarding is a way that you inspire people. You give them a design system, a way to think about how elements will live together. And so this could be anything from a bunch of printed out pieces of paper to a Pinterest board, just any way that you want to show the client inspirational content. This could be anything from sites you like that might fit with their brand, images, colors, fonts, text or paragraphs that you like, stuff like anything, really, anything that could inform the design direction for the website. That all goes into a mood board. And then you want the client to make some choices, because if they're not making choices, it doesn't make your life any easier. So you want to say, do you want this color palette or that color palette? You want them to make a firm choice, this or that, right? This font or that font. Do you prefer this tone or that tone of writing? And so ultimately, by creating this menu of choices, you're giving them a very directed way to say, I like this, I don't like this. Because if you say nothing, if you don't give them choices, then they're not even going to know how to start. And so this actually makes your life easier. And then finally, there's wireframing. And if you want to get a really quick overview of wireframing and even a bunch of these design processes, I would really recommend looking at the UX pre-course from Lambda. It'll get you a great footing for all this stuff. So ultimately, a wireframe doesn't need to be very much. You don't even need to be a great artist to make one. Ultimately, just take a pen and paper. You might have 1 page for every page of the site that you intend to build, and just draw out a very lo-fi version of what you think will work for your client. So you might say, I think this title should go here. I think this is what the menu bar should look like. I think these buttons should say this. These colors should be here. Ultimately, it's just about showing them on pen and paper, here's what your site could look like. And then once the client approves that, then you should start building the site. And in this process, you should include some revisions, right? So after the mood boarding, you might say, hey, if you don't like any of this, we can scrap it and start over. And then after the wireframe, you should say, hey, if you don't like any of this wireframing, we can scrap it and start over. But you should do as many revisions as you stipulate in your contract and no more. That becomes something called scope creep, where the client keeps asking for stuff and doesn't want to pay you for it. And ultimately, that's bad for you because it takes away time from your other clients or your studies. And it's not really doing justice to the work you're providing to the client because they're sort of nickel and diming you for free, whereas you should be charging, again, for the skills you have. And that now the stuff that you really came here for, which is how do you build the site? Ultimately, I don't have much to say on this topic because this is what you've been doing since you started at Lambda. Step one is just don't reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of templates out there on the web. And what these things do is preclude you from having to worry about things like, will this site be fully responsive? Will it work for every possible phone? Will this work across browsers? Will this work for all these various edge cases? Ultimately, that becomes a lot to think about, and it's a lot to test. Instead, I'd recommend using a template, which is what I did. I went to this site called Freebiesbug that you can see in the screenshot. It's the link that I provided here. And ultimately, using things like that just makes coding so much easier because they've done the hard things for you, and it's pretty easy to change out copy. Even layout stuff is pretty easy. But generally, they'll work pretty well for different sizes of device or different browsers, which end up being the things that are very difficult for us to deal with. And then if you want to use something like WordPress or Wix, just check with your client. I recall Josh telling us about this at one point during the first month of Lambda. It's like, yeah, I use Wix sometimes and clients pay me for it. And I was really impressed by that because I'd never even thought of doing something like that. It felt like cheating to me. But look, if you get your client to agree, it's not cheating at all. It's what they asked for. And then you have things like Unsplash and Pexels, which are resources for images, video, music, stuff like that. You can just go find these Creative Commons assets on the web to use on sites, and you don't have to pay for them. The next step is customizing and writing new code. So once you've found a service or a template that works for you, dig around in the code, understand what's going on. From there, you can adjust and build out what you agreed to based on your wireframes. And then you can deploy to GitHub Pages or Netlify, and you can show your client work in progress and talk about it if you've set up whatever cadence for a weekly status call or a monthly status call, whatever feels right to you. And from there, once the client says, we're done, I'm ready, and once you feel ready, you can go ahead and deploy the site. You're at the end of the road. And so this is a time for you to celebrate and show off what you've learned throughout the process. And so I like to use Namecheap. You can use whoever you like. I just find Namecheap's customer service to be really, really good. But you want a registrar so you can buy a domain name, and you want a hosting service that you can actually put the site on the internet. What I find when you're creating an account with one of these registrars is to sit down with your client and do it together. That way you can use their email and password and their credit card to pay the fees. Because ultimately, these are recurring fees that you're going to be paying. It ends up being like, whatever, $30 a year. But ultimately, you don't want that on your email and your credit card. You want that going straight to the client so they can handle it. And then even here, you can charge a set recurring fee to be a webmaster. You can say, hey, for $50 a year, I'll handle all your registrar nonsense. I'll take care of it for you. And people are willing to pay that because they just don't want to think about it. Just to finish up, we're about at the end here. How do you complete a contract? Ultimately, you just look back at what you set out in your agreement and make sure you've achieved the scope. So if you said, I'm going to do this, this, and this, just make sure you did it. That way your client can't turn around and say you didn't perform your services. And then next, once you're deployed and the client gives you approval, just get them to send you an email saying you're done and go ahead and collect your fees. That's about it. And if you like the client, you can try and get some word of mouth referrals to other people. You can outline on your rate card what you can offer them in the future. So maybe webmastering services, maybe SEO, maybe other pages on their site. And if they really liked you, just get those intros. And you can say, hey, like, I know I charged you $1,000 for whatever this contract was. If one of your referrals comes back to me and decides to work with me, I'll give them $100 off and I'll give you $100 off on your next whatever service you want. And ultimately, that's it. That's the whole process. And so if you were to have a little cheat sheet to walk away and look at, just here are 12 things that I would say you can walk away with. Sales, just be confident. Dress the part, talk the part, be confident and competent because you have the skills. Next is know your worth. right? These skills are rare. Stats from the government show that there's going to be a shortage of 1 million programmers in the next couple of years. So we're rare, and just based on supply and demand, your skills are worth quite a lot of money, and you can charge that. Don't be afraid. Then get to know fast. Remember, if a deal's taking you really long and there's no end in sight to close it, just go get to know. Get them to say, look, I don't want to work with you. It's fine. You can move on. And then ultimately, this whole business is going to be about cultivating your lead list. As much as we want to code and build things, it ends up being a lot about sales. So cultivating those sales is super important. For legal, you want to have a rock solid contract. And so the boilerplates I've provided are a start, but you're going to have to work on them a little bit. Watch for scope creep, right? You don't want people to, I just saw a question come in saying, where do we get templates? All of that will be in the slides. There are links, and I'll provide the slides at the end of this today. So to answer that question, going back to just finishing up this last slide, watch out for scope creep. You don't want people to take advantage of you, right? And some people will do that. It's unfortunate, but it's a consequence of getting into business. So just keep an eye out. Next is find professional help when it comes to legal, finance, stuff like that, right? Just like most people have an accountant to help with their taxes, you might want help from a lawyer or an accountant to deal with this stuff. And you might go to a lawyer and not have that much money on hand, and you might be able to negotiate something called contingent compensation, where the lawyer will help you up front and say, hey, based on if you sell your first contract, I'll charge you half of what you make on that as compensation for my legal services. And that'd be okay. In fact, this is what startups do a lot when they can't afford lawyers. And then finally, just research, right? Just like you research new frameworks, new code, just new developments in the tech industry, you might want to look at things like legal, look at how small businesses think about their problems, think about accounting. These are all things that you should just know a little bit about as you're going into them. And then finally, there's the build process. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of work that's been done in programming, in computer science, in web development that you can draw on. You don't need to rebuild all these algorithms and sites from scratch. And again, solicit tons of client input. You are there as a service provider to your client. And so to provide great client service, you want to get their input as early and as often as you can. Next, you want to voice your expertise, right? Again, you have these skills, you have this confidence. You should be saying, in my opinion, I would do this. I think this color would be better and not this color. I think this tone of voice would go over better than this. Stuff like that, right? As time goes on, as you do more and more contracts, you'll build up this expertise. And you should be able to talk about this stuff and be confident in your opinions. And finally, pick your battles wisely. Sometimes you'll run up against client wishes that strike you as bad or silly. And you should inform them when things like this happen. But sometimes your clients will be intractable. And as long as they're not asking for something unethical or something that's just completely out of the realm of possibility, you might want to let it go, because you want to pick the hill you want to die on. If you get into a fight with your client over something relatively small, it might blow up the contract, and you don't necessarily want that. So that's the checklist, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I will now have a look at questions. So, there is the thread. So I'm gonna look at the thread super quick. So Sergey asks, did you work by yourself or you hired other devs as well? I was a solo practitioner. I was all by myself. It was really just me supporting myself a little while I was in college. So it's just something I did over the summer. Each of my contracts was about $500, and nobody really batted an eye. So that's that question. Aaron's question is, what kind of portfolio would you recommend? I would say it depends on who you're going after, right? If you're going after like the local pizza place, the local doctor's office, a little bit of your brand and some of your best work will do. If you're going after like larger businesses, like places with 100 employees or more, maybe a little more corporate would do better. But ultimately, you want to fit your brand to the sort of targets you're going after. And then Tony asks, non-compete. So as a freelancer, you actually don't want to sign non-competes. Non-competes will get in the way of you being able to do business with other people. And I'm pretty sure the law surrounding freelancing stipulates that they can't force you to sign non-competes. So don't, I would say just don't do that. You don't need to talk about it. There will be non-disclosure agreements, which are a different thing, meaning that you just can't talk about your client's business to others. You should feel free to sign those. Like, don't sell secrets. It's not a good look. It's super bad and it'll destroy your reputation. But yeah, non-competes, don't touch them. If someone wants you to sign a non-compete, run away in the other direction. NDA, totally fine. Pretty standard. Jason says, great presentation. Alan says, what a beast. Riley says, claps. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Henry says, what was the main demographic of business you served? So I was looking at these relatively small businesses, like just a couple of people working. So I did a store that sold instruments. I did a PBS producer who had quit PBS, who was trying to start her own sort of TV agency. I did a couple doctor's offices. I did like a pet shop. That's what comes to mind right now, but generally very small businesses. You could do a little bit bigger businesses, and I would say just having a little bit more of an enterprise feel about your brand and the way you talk and the way your contract looks and how you approach is going to make the difference. And of course, you can charge a little more the bigger the business you're going after. And what was my average turnaround time? So I would basically develop leads on a week-to-week basis. Like I would go approach someone one week, I'd give them a week to mull things over, I'd then go try and close the contract the next week. And then the actual build generally was like, initial build at least, was 10 hours for me. Again, you're using a template and the clients are generally giving you assets. It's not that hard to just plug and play. And then revisions can take a little longer depending on how antsy your client gets about what you've built. But your contract should really protect you in cases where the clients jump the shark and ask for crazy things that are not possible. I did have that happen once. A contract went bad on me and we had to cancel it in the middle. And I got paid for the work I had done because my contract protected me. Yeah, so average turnaround time, it doesn't have to be a lot. You can spend however much time you want, and if you're charging hourly, that's more money. All I would say on that is don't charge, if you're going to charge hourly, don't charge more than you've actually worked, because that is fraud, and it is illegal. Don't do that. Alando asks, where did you get the template from? So generally, web development agencies open source their contracts. And so I've used some of those, and I've shared them in the slides. So Hargobind asks, what did the scope of my projects look like? So generally, I did 1 or 2 pages, generally landing pages for small businesses. And they were not necessarily, like, I did pretty small jobs for pretty small businesses. And I didn't charge a ton. I used, I mean, my rates were $50 an hour, which in the scope of a business is not a ton of money, really. I've seen people at agencies and consulting firms sell multi-million-dollar contracts to large businesses like enterprises, just to build websites and do design. And so like in the grand scheme of things, $50 an hour is not much. I see a thread here, so I'm gonna have a look into that. Yeah, Katie's got it. So this is Freebies Bug, which is the templates I use for code. They're great. Kai asks, do you ever have trouble getting people to pay up or respect the contract? So yeah, weirdly enough, my uncle was a problem spot for me. I've never needed a lawyer. I've never even been in a situation where I needed a lawyer. Generally, people respect the contract because guess what? A business has a lot more to lose than you do. And if your contract is good, you can basically show, like, I'm a vendor to this person, I'm protected by this contract, and they've broken it. And nobody really wants to ever go to court. So ultimately, it's just saying, like, calling the client up and saying, hey, I noticed you didn't pay. if you don't by this date, I need to go talk to somebody. And generally, they sort of don't want that to happen. Samuel asks, did you build your sites with CMS that clients could use to edit content? I did not. I would talk to Josh Nell because I know he's definitely done that. I'm not super familiar with doing that. Most of these people just wanted landing pages. They didn't have blogs or anything. They just wanted somewhere where their business could have a place on the web to live, where people could just land on it and call or drive there or whatever. So no, simple answer. Kai, if you've never done this work before and you don't have a portfolio, how do you build something out? Wait for the Lambda course to get to that point, or should we just make some dummy websites? I gotta say, like, it's pretty easy to have a dummy website. I would go through this process as a dummy, make a fake business, and just get through that, and then you have something to point to. At the end of the first month of Lambda, for the first project week, you're actually going to build a website for an architectural firm, and that's something you can point to. So put a lot of work into it, and it becomes something that you can say, like, hey, I actually have great skills. Here's evidence. Did I make my own graphics and icons? I did not. I tended to use either Noun Project or Font Awesome. They're both free, and they're very easy to use. Graphics, I use Pexels and Unsplash for images. They're all Creative Commons. Yeah, like some people will use Shutterstock, and if you're getting into large enterprise businesses, I would recommend doing that because they care about owning the rights to graphics. But generally, these small businesses don't really care. It doesn't matter to them. Gabriel asks, what's your policy for cancellations? Generally, a cancellation is going to happen when there are irreconcilable differences between you and your client. So this is the sort of jargon they use when you want to divorce somebody. But generally, if the client is asking you for something that is literally not possible, like, oh, I want you to place me higher on Google Maps results. Someone asked me that, and I'm like, I literally cannot do that. There is no world in which anyone I know could do that, aside from people I know who work at Google. But like, yeah, if they're asking you for something crazy, or if they're not holding up their side, you can cancel. And there are severability clauses that enable you to do that. And so in the first contract I linked, you should be able to see some examples of that. If they ask for a logo, there are logo generators. You can go to producthunt.com, which is part of AngelList now, and you can just type in logo generator, and it'll give you like probably 6 or 10 different sites that have found ways to programmatically generate logos. Ultimately, your client, if they have a business, yep, that's the one. You just posted the right link. If they have a business, they should ostensibly have some sort of logo. And that might be a matter of literally going outside their building and taking a picture of it and then photoshopping a little from there, or like taking a picture of a business card. I've done that. I actually did have to take a picture of a business card once and then get rid of the background. Just get creative with it. But generally, they should have these assets. Let me see if anyone posted in the thread. Yeah, a bunch more people. Nope, these are the same. Okay, let me see if anyone chatted in Zoom. So these are the same questions. Where do you go to make contracts? Again, I just use contracts from other agencies. Does anybody else have more questions? Because I know we've got like 9 more minutes together. And I'm happy to spend the time. Have I ever done SEO? I've been asked to. It's never been something that has made sense to me in terms of cost benefit. I have friends who actually sell ads for Google AdClick, and I always say, I'll refer you to them if you want SEO. I'm not particularly good at it. It's not necessarily something that I want to learn. So I haven't done it. I mean, I've done basic SEO like meta tags. But no, it was not. It's not been my cup of tea. Thank you. Appreciate the compliment. I did not know Austin wrote a book on SEO. That's cool. I'll have to check it out. Anybody else? And in general, don't be shy. I mean, I'm a student. You can find me on Slack at literally any time. So yeah, don't worry about it. This is not the end. So crazy 3D website stuff, go use FreebiesBug or Code Drops or literally any number of other places where you can just like say website template. Product Hunt is also, yeah, I mean, you can, Product Hunt is great. You can find stuff. Yeah, generally, Kai, it's to excite people, but yeah, you can make them. Like the instrument store, I made them a video background of a guy playing guitar. I found a video online that was Creative Commons and used it and just made it the background. And it seems to be working well. Like the owner of the store was impressed by it, so I imagine customers are impressed by it. Josue asks, any links you can share for websites you built? Yeah, I can drop my GitHub here, and if you go like all the way back, some of my first repos are things that I built. Common client objections. This is a really good question. A lot of people don't believe they need a website, right? If you're non-technical and you've never had a website, you don't see the reason to have a website. And one of the best ways to overcome this is say, look, you're a small business competing with many other similar small businesses in our town. When people go to search dentist near me on Google, well, guess who's going to show up? The one with a website. And this has actually been something I've experienced, again, with that instrument store, where if you say like piano lessons near me, because they offer piano lessons as one of their services, they'll actually come up where some of the other stores nearby will not. And so client objections, I think they're readily handled by data. So if you say, hey, I've seen like brands get this much more lift based on having a website, and these are things you can go find on the internet. Like Statista.com is a great site with random statistics about pretty much everything. You can go to Think with Google. They release reports just about random digital culture, web stuff. So those end up being pretty helpful. I mean, just Google around and say, why is having a website helpful? The Small Business Administration, I believe, talks about it a little bit. But yeah, there's tons of stuff. Like, just go research. Ultimately, there are so many people on the web who have great opinions, who just talk about this stuff, and it's readily there, and you can use it. I mean, so Google local businesses that don't have websites. Yeah, if they don't show up, they don't have a website. So if you say like Joe's Pizzeria near me and you don't find a search result that says Joe's Pizzeria on the first page, they don't have a website. Or they have one and it is so terrible that it doesn't show up on the first page of Google. Google search results follow power law, in which 60% of people look at the first page, 20% of people look at the second page, and then exponentially fewer look at every page after that. So if you're not showing up on the first page, your website is pretty bad. Kai, you were asking about finding a part-time job at the Apple or Microsoft store. I mean, hey, it's cool, and I recommend doing that if you want to buy a new machine. It's like something good to do if you want that employee discount. How much time commitment did I spend to get myself on my first client? This was a friends and family thing. I talked to, actually my dad needed a website for his business, and he started talking to other people because he's like, hey, check out my new website. My son made it. And other people are like, wow, he's pretty good at this. And it ended up just leading to lots of other people who wanted to work with me. So ultimately, friends and family are going to be a huge part of how you get clients. Josue comments, you can check out your town's business directory. Definitely, 100%. Like, people sort of disparage the yellow pages. It's still a massive trove of local business data. And there are places like whitepages.com that you can still go to, or like Craigslist. And you can definitely find this stuff. It exists out there, and it's going to take some work. Like, prospecting is hard. It is sort of unforgiving work. But once you get through it, it'll be worth it, right? You'll develop better skills. You'll be able to talk to clients. You'll be able to talk about your craft much better. And so when you get out of Lambda and want to go talk to an employer, you can say, hey, I did this. I convinced this client to give me money for my skills. I'm clearly good at this. You should hire me. Gabriel asks, would you recommend freelancing on Upwork or other sites? I'm pretty much going to say a hard no on this one. Why is that? So if you're on a site like Fiverr or Upwork or Elance, you're competing with people in other countries who are willing to do this work for pennies on your dollar. And ultimately, you don't want to be in a price competition with those people because it ends up being a race to the bottom. And so like Econ 101, if you look at something called perfect competition, it's where people are selling a commodity good. And ultimately, code kind of is a commodity good at this point. Pretty much whoever's undercut the prices is going to get the deal. And so you actually want to be your own person and go out into the world and sell yourself, because ultimately that gets you the confidence and the skills, right? If you're waiting for people to come to you, chances are it's not going to happen. And you're not going to find the people you want to work with, right? Being local, being after these small businesses gives you something that other people around the world can't. You can physically go to the store owner and say, hey, let's talk about the problem you have. You can provide that high-touch client service that no one else can. And so my view is that you should view yourself as a premium service provider, not somebody who's willing to do the work for like $5 an hour, because you shouldn't do that. It sets a bad precedent for you. It anchors your mind and biases you to devalue your own skills. Don't do that. Don't do that. You should have a lot of confidence. You put in a lot of time here. Kai asks, hey, I see you don't have a presence on the web. How about we fix that for you? Feel like that would freak people out. I mean, look, maybe it'll freak some people out, but you should be having that volume on your lead list to be able to say, hey, look, if you're going to say you're a creep and you don't want to work with me, that's fine. Like, I'll go to the next person. And the other thing is like saying, hey, here's how I understood that you don't have a website. I shop at your store every week. Or, hey, my cousin works for you. Or, hey, my uncle is like the manager's friend. Or whatever, you know, literally whatever connection you can come up with to make that less creepy, do that. Because everybody wants a business provider who's also friendly and who also has a connection, right? When you talk to like a telemarketer and they say, oh, hey, we're blah, 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 we want to talk to you, blah, 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 you pretty much just hang up instantly. But if someone calls you, like, say from a university or a high school or whatever, or just like wherever, or Girl Scouts, and they say, hey, we're fundraising for XYZ thing, we live down the street from you, or you're an alum, or whatever, right? That personal connection keeps you on the phone just a little bit longer, and that extra time is what convinces people. I see we're going to run out of time, so let me just grab this last question, and then I'll turn it back over to Bree. So code is such an easy commodity to sell. Why do so many people not have a website? Why do people spend lots of money on a nice premium website? So the whole premise of this question, well, the premise of the second question is, why do people spend lots of money on a nice premium website? So for that, when you're looking at a small business, you are selling your brain power and your skills and this is not a word, but the premiumness of you. Versus other people who are in other countries or not local. They can't do that necessarily, right? You're a person, whereas they're just like a chat box on the web. And when you get to like the really big websites, they're getting to be enterprise, right? And when you're looking at like a Nike or an Under Armour and they want a new website, well, they're making $1 billion in revenue every year. They can burn $1 million on hiring an agency. So it depends on the demographic you're targeting. So if code is such an easy commodity to sell, why do so many people not have a website? Well, most people are just sort of ignorant, right? There's something called, it's a mental model called Hanlon's razor. So you should assume that people are not malicious, they're ignorant when things don't go your way. And I remember Brandon, who's in my cohort, was mentioning this in one of our small groups, one of our recitations at night. And I find it to be so true. Like most people who do things that seem wrong or silly or foolish or bad, they're not evil. They're just kind of ignorant about what should be happening in that situation. And so many people don't have a website just because they don't know why they need one. And Ty says 90% of people have smartphones and they usually go to the internet to find resources before anything. That's a huge reason. I mean, you could say that as a value prop of why to build a website. Gabriel says we have a freelancing channel. That is good to know. I think after this presentation, hopefully that will be a little more fired up. Yeah, mistake theory versus conflict theory. Very true. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back on video. Are we good? I think we might be good. So I know I'm eating up time that other people should be using to do their homework for today.
Pretty much. Well, now you got the whole group. They're all going to be razzing you on the freelancing channel.
That is fine.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming and giving that awesome presentation and chatting with all your classmates and all the other cohorts. So we're going to go ahead and close out this brown bag. You guys can find them on Slack or in the freelancing channel. So don't worry about trying to ask last minute questions. But anyways, everybody have a good rest of your day, and thanks again. Bye, everyone.